like to call our program to order. Thank you everyone for making it. My name's Andrew Garrett. I'm the ULI Vice Chair, Toronto. It is my pleasure to kick off this morning's very special event featuring two of our most important political leaders at the helm of addressing our city and our nation's affordability housing crisis. This event is in partnership with the National Task Force for Housing and Climate, and in Jennifer's opening remarks, she will introduce the task force in greater detail. It's wonderful to see everyone here today. Again, a very full house, sold out. We have a great cross-section of people here today from the public, from the not-for-profit sector, from the private sector, and most importantly, we have champions from all these sectors looking to create solutions. It's clear both industry and government are ready to be part of the change, and so we clearly need to ensure all in Canada have a home they can afford. So importantly, we begin with land acknowledgement. As a Toronto region-based organization, we acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We acknowledge Toronto is covered by the Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, and newcomers in this generation or generations past. We'd like to acknowledge and honor those who came here involuntarily, particularly descendants from those who were brought here through enslavement. As Vice Chair ULI Toronto, I'm proud of the ongoing work that we lead in partnership with our industry volunteers to putting meaning and drive behind this statement. In March, ULI Toronto will be convening a 2.5-day technical advisory panel for the city to Toronto's Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit in partnership with CP Planning. This spring, our Truth and Reconciliation Industry Cohort will be announcing how all of us in the greater Golden Horseshoe can make economic reconciliation a feature of land development in our region. So please stay tuned for these opportunities to participate. So before I introduce Mayor Chow, I want to extend our thanks to this morning's event sponsors, Subterra Renewables. Very important to acknowledge those that make sure we can all gather here together. And our other event sponsor, LIUNA. Can't underestimate what it takes to build a city. Her Worship, Olivia Chow, will be joining us by video, and given that she's in Scarborough this morning making a critical announcement about new affordable housing, Mayor Chow has quickly taken on the severe supply challenge at the affordable end of the spectrum. Her tenure has coincided with a movement to better align levels of government towards these goals. And in fact, Mayor Chow continues to work closely with both of our fireside chat guests today. Most recently, Minister Fraser and Mayor Chow have collaborated on the Housing Accelerator Fund, announcing a $471 million for the City of Toronto. Minister Fraser, since taking the reins of the Ministry of Housing and Infrastructure only 6 months ago, has been pushing the boundaries of the role and collaborating with municipalities across the nation to drive more housing supply. Mayor Chow also continues to rely on the strategic advice of the housing and development in the City of Toronto from Jennifer Keesmack, former Chief Planner and now CEO at Collective Marquee. So Jennifer is also here today as a task force member, and together, Jennifer and Minister Fraser will undertake a deep dive into our housing sector and the challenge of delivering at scale while meeting our climate objectives. They'll be followed by an expert panel With that, I'll ask our team to roll tape on Mayor Chow's remarks.
Hello and welcome. I really want to join you all this morning, but I'm actually in Scarborough to announce the construction of over 300 new affordable homes. It's really important because each night, over 10,000 Torontonians sleep in city shelters, and a lot of them are children too. Many more in the streets, parks, and ravines. It's heartbreaking. And tens of thousands of people are waiting for more than 10 years on the list for affordable housing. Young people and families are forced to leave our city. Seniors with fixed incomes are terrified they will be evicted. We have to tackle our housing crisis head on. But for too long, we only built two types of homes: detached homes at the edge of town or high-rise condominiums. Multiplex didn't make the cut. Rental units were ignored. A townhouse was zoned out of existence. For almost a quarter century, governments walked away from building affordable housing entirely. But a welcome change has arrived. Toronto is back building housing thanks to the federal government. We are bringing a bold and transformative housing plan to life, a plan that includes 65,000 rent-controlled units, more public, nonprofit, and rent-geared-to-income homes. A third of renters' income, not what the market dictates. We are really seeing the results. Last month, we announced the construction of what will be Ontario's largest co-op across the street from the Kennedy subway station. This is all in addition to building hundreds of thousands of market units, because it will take building all types of homes to end this housing crisis and doing it faster. You and I know building more housing is a national project. We have a great partner with Minister Fraser. His leadership is so greatly appreciated. He's doing a hard job of getting everyone pushing in the same direction from coast to coast to coast, and it is making a big difference. I was proud to stand with Minister Fraser just before the holidays to announce the federal government's biggest investment from the new Housing Accelerator Fund, right here in Toronto. Funds that will help us build tens of thousands of new homes while helping push forward much needed reforms, more density, as of right, multiplex, all types of housing. And that's not the only program. There's the Rapid Housing Initiative, there's the loan program, all types of programs through the CMHC. And of course, it was a pleasure for me to join Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister, a little over a week ago to announce increased funding for the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit, or COP, which helps supplement people's rent as they move from the shelter system to permanent housing. It has been an amazing tool, all these programs, to get rent geared to income, modular and supportive housing, and all types fast for people. This federal government is stepping up to tackle the housing crisis. There's so much more to discuss, so many ideas out there, but luckily for all of you, Minister Fraser is in the room. Have a great fireside chat. Now, I want to throw it over to Jennifer Kiesmat and Alex Bosokovic. But before I do, I hope I will see you all on February 15th for a sold-out fireside chat with myself and CBC's David Carman on how cities like Toronto are helping to lead the national housing agenda. Enjoy this chat.
I'd like to welcome up Jennifer Kiesmat and Minister Fraser.
Good morning, everyone. It's super to be here and to see so many people in the room who are so passionate. Hi, Luke. So passionate about housing, to be here with our Minister of Housing and Infrastructure. We have people in this room who are doing pretty much everything. We have people on the finance side, people on the policy side. We've got former Chief Planner Paul Bedford. We also have interim Chief Planner Carrie Vimbakis. Carrie, where are you? Can you stand up and give everyone a wave? Because I'm over here. Carrie's taken on a really critical role. She's been in the role for 6 weeks. I'm sorry, Carrie, you might now get hounded at the end of the... That's the job. That's the job. That's what it is. We have folks from CMHC, from the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, from the Canada Lands Corporation, and of course, importantly, lots of folks here who put shovels in the ground, who get stuff built. We are going to speak for about 45 minutes. We're also going to take some questions from the floor. So if you're inclined, by all means, we'll wave your hand a little bit later in this session, and we'll love to hear questions from the floor. Following our conversation, we're going to have a panel discussion. And I'll let the panel introduce themselves. They will be hosted by the architecture critic from the Globe and Mail, Alex, whom many of you know and many of you read, and I trust that will be a very rich conversation interrogating some of the things that we're about to talk about right now. So to begin, tell me about the socks.
Look, I still remember watching the Raptors' first game when Damon Stoudemire came to town and created a franchise here. So they were a gift from a friend after the 2019 championship, and when I get low on laundry, I wear them to work events.
Oh, come on. You were like, I'm going to Toronto. You were hunting through the laundry basket.
Like, I got a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old. If I was that organized, you guys would be, I'd be very surprised.
So let me begin with a question about where we are right now. I think for many of us in the room who've been at this for many years, I'm actually old enough now that I can say I've been in this space for decades now. It's pretty shocking, I think, what we've seen over the course of really the past 6 months, maybe a tiny bit longer, to see the federal government coming to the table in such a substantive way and saying, hold on, housing crisis, something needs to be done. We're going to get our hands dirty. We're going to get involved. You've been obviously at the center of driving that change. Tell me about the evolution of the role and the thinking of the federal government and why you're at the table at this moment in such a really significant way.
Yeah, look, thanks very much for the question. I think people will have seen a step in a different direction about 6 months ago. The greatest, I think, political attribute I may have is really timing, whether it's choosing to run in the right election or coming into a job when you've got the resources and the buy-in from your colleagues to do it well. But we decided back when we were campaigning in 2015 that we wanted to get back into the housing space generally with a specific focus on affordable housing. Folks in this room will appreciate that we went through a period, and Mayor Chow alluded to this, of almost 30 years where the federal government more or less washed its hands of the responsibility to help build housing. As a result, we have a very direct and predictable shortage of affordable housing that exists across Canada today, and boy, do I wish we had a time machine, but we don't. So we started to advance programs at that specific point in time. If you get more recently, a couple of years ago, we started to realize that the challenge was impacting so many more people than low-income families. And a lot of middle-class families were being priced out of cities that help drive our economy. The challenges for young people to find a place that they can rent, let alone ever hope to buy a place, are enormous. And that's where we came up with ideas like the Housing Accelerator Fund, where we started to increase the capitalization for programs like the then RCFI, now Apartment Construction Loan Program. But over the course of this summer, things reached a fever pitch. I come from a town that has about as many people who are in this room right now, and 8 of them are my family members. So when you start to see that communities like that are seeing people priced out of the market, you're starting to see communities like that have small encampments emerge. It demands that the federal government step up not only within areas exclusively within its its own jurisdiction, but that we use federal leadership and federal money to incentivize change at other levels of government as well. So although it may seem like things really lit up about 6 months ago, the groundwork had been laid over the last number of years. But it's nice when you see the entire world at every level of government, regardless of political party, and everybody, regardless of what portfolio they may have in cabinet, say, hey, housing is a top priority because we hear about it everywhere we go. And when the Canadian public starts speaking with a united voice, your politicians do as well.
So something you said just kind of like hit me in the face. So what is the population of the town where you were born and raised?
So the community that I was born has like 200 people. We got like more animals than people in my community. I live
That must be nice.
Yeah, that's right. Look, it's lovely. You should come visit Miragamish. It's beautiful in the summertime. But the town I live in now, I moved to the booming metropolis of New Glasgow. It's got a little less than 10,000 people today. It's part of a conglomeration of small towns. Total of about 25,000 in the towns, maybe 45,000 in the broader area if you include the rural communities like the one I grew up in.
So you said encampments emerging in these very small places. We're going to talk about solutions, but I think it behooves us to spend a few minutes here just resting on this point that we have encampments in municipalities across this entire country, in Pickering to Ajax to London, Ontario, to communities of 200 people. How do you kind of process that when your role is to ensure everyone's housed?
Look, it's not easy, and I think part of everybody draws on their own life experiences when they're trying to identify what problems are, and more importantly, what the solutions are. There's something that sticks with me across policy areas about coming from a small town. You know people, or you are 1 degree of separation from them. There are people I grew up with who were childhood friends that are living with mental illnesses who do not have a home. There are family members of people who who work on my team in Ottawa who have challenges with addictions that do not have a place to live. There are family members of my own who may not be living without a roof over their head, but have been told that their landlord needs to jack their rent more than $1,000 a month to cover the increasing mortgage payments. And despite the fact that she's just had her fourth child, as being told within a few months, either pay $1,200 more a month or find a new place to live. When you know the people who are showing up asking for help at a shelter that's at capacity, it makes the problem a personal one that you want to solve. And I think it's important that when we're trying to address systemic solutions, at the center of that question is who are you actually trying to help? People who live in encampments are not a political problem to be solved. They're human beings who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect and deserve to have a roof over their head. If we can maintain that perspective when we advance policies, we're going to have a more successful policy outcome that's driven by consideration for the well-being of our neighbors, and I think that's a healthy place to start.
Well, ironically, I think one of the things that's really happened over the course of the past 5 years is that we're all probably 1 degree of separation, as you outlined, family members, staff members in your office, people you went to high school with. I think many of us in the Canadian context at this point are 1 degree of separation from someone who is struggling with the insecurity that comes with the rising cost of housing, and including many middle-class homeowners who are, 1 job loss, 1 divorce, 1 more interest rate increase from being in a precarious situation when it comes to paying their mortgage or paying their rent. So I think that, maybe action comes out of hitting this really profound moment where we're in an acute situation, and the Canadian way is to take care of one another. And I think for many of us, we look around the landscape of our cities and we don't really recognize this place because there's so many people who are struggling and so many people who are unhoused. Let's flip to talking a bit about some of the things that you see as being the critical solutions. Obviously, the Housing Accelerator Fund has just been, has had a tremendous amount of traction. You've been using some of your bully pulpit to boss municipalities around, to shut out the NIMBYs, if you will, to push municipalities to enable the building of more housing. is it real? Is that money really going to produce something? Or are these just a lot of big flashy announcements, which, I've seen a lot of them over the years.
So look, I'll address the Housing Accelerator Fund but before I do, if the conversation's more broadly about solutions, keep in mind the municipal zoning piece is one part of the puzzle. We have to make it more cost effective for people to build homes. We do have to deal with the red tape at a municipal level. We absolutely need to invest in affordable housing, and we have to grow the workforce to build the homes. But this one area has gotten a lot of traction. I think it's gotten traction because it's an issue people knew had existed for a long time, and sense that overcoming the inertia that can exist within a given community can be very difficult. And I think we're seeing real traction, not just because there's a slew of announcements that have been rolled out, but with those announcements, there have been changes actually implemented in cities across Canada, or commitments made to implement them. I'm looking at Brad Bradford here on City Council, who was texting with our team members leading up to a recent debate, making sure that the importance of density around transit stations doesn't get lost in the mix. The reality is we have conversations with council. We live stream council meetings in our office. There was a recent meeting in Oakville. I left our cabinet retreat social event so I could go tune into the live stream of their council meeting. And it's created this culture where we really do care about the measures that are being implemented. And what gives me faith that this is going to be something more than the announcement itself is that it's not about the number of dollars that's being pumped into cities. It's about the number of homes that the changes they're actually implementing are going to make. In the last 6 months, we've seen the most rapid and significant upzoning of Canada in our nation's history. We've seen in big cities across the country a virtual end to exclusionary zoning. We've seen a new mindset adopted collectively in every part of the country that if you live within walking distance to a transit station, the person who wants to build on that land should be able to build an apartment. We start to see affordable housing secretariats established at municipal levels specifically to build more housing for low-income families. And we're seeing the rapid adoption of digital permitting processes that are going to reduce the time to getting the approval that you need. The reason I think that there is space for the federal government, not to create this solution, but to incentivize it, is there are good partners in municipalities right across the country. Cam Guthrie, sitting in the second row here, has been championing this stuff for years. We don't sit in boardrooms in Ottawa talking about what's going to happen. We talk to people on the ground, builders, nonprofits, municipal councillors, who know what the solutions are. In some instances, we might be giving them a little bit of political cover because the conversation is not, are we going to allow density or not? It's, are we going to allow density or let tens of millions of dollars fade away from our community? And that economic calculus I'm watching inform the political conversations that play out at council when we live stream them in our office. And it's been refreshing because I think we've given a platform for a lot of cities who wanted to take action for years, but now have a stronger political argument as a result. Absolutely.
It's a perfect example of the carrot and the stick, and public policy making at the federal level that, I liked what you said about giving municipalities cover. I think that's absolutely critical. I'm having a hard time processing the fact that you live stream council meetings in your office as someone who spent 3 days a month for 5 years straight sitting in council meetings. When I hear it in the background, I have a bit of a hard time staying in the room, but I think it's a really fantastic that you're doing that, and I think it's a reflection of the fact that you're hitting the right notes with respect to the way you're sort of using the stick, the carrot being the money, the stick being make these changes, or you won't get the money. There's a lot to unpack from what you just said, and I want to pull on a bunch of different strands. But the first thing I want to do is just mention for those in the room who may not be aware that this event is co-sponsored by the Task Force on Housing and Climate, which is a national task force that is being led by former Mayor Don Iveson and former Deputy Prime Minister Lisa Raitt. And the objective of this task force is really to link together the fact that we need to build 5.8 million homes in a very short period of time with our climate objectives, recognizing that not all housing is actually good housing. And this is something that makes me very nervous right now. I see us, build, build, build. Well, but we want to make sure that we're building the right kind of housing and that we're building housing where people are going to thrive and where we're not creating an environmental disaster. And of course, I wouldn't be me if I didn't mention the World Green Belt. And the fact that we, of course, know building more sprawl is a real risk to this country. And you could argue that one of the reasons we find ourselves in this remarkable position of having a profound shortage of housing is because over the past 10 years, 75% of all new housing built in Canada has been built in greenfields. It's been built where we had to lay roads, lay water, lay electricity, build schools. And of course, there's a growing dialogue about how critical it is to be building in places where we have schools, where we have roads, where we have infrastructure. This has been a key theme of the work of the task force, that if we really care about building quickly, and if we really care about our climate objectives, we need to be building in locations where it is possible for people to live without a car, where we already have existing infrastructure. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how much that locational efficiency and that climate mandate, how you kind of link that together in your own thinking and your own policy drivers for getting supply built and getting it built as quickly as possible.
Yeah, look, it's a big question. And look, I'll start with the conclusion. It's very important that we build where services, infrastructure, and economic opportunities already exist. As a society, the frame that I adopt when I'm trying to figure some of these challenges out in my own conversations with our team is in the world of can we create incentives or can we remove disincentives? When I think philosophically about where people should build homes, look, I've got a bit of a libertarian streak, I suppose. If you own your own land and you want to pay for it for yourself, if it's not an ecologically sensitive area, a protected area, you should be able to do what you want to do. So if you want to build a single-family home on the farm where you grew up, that should be okay. But it doesn't need to be subsidized by different levels of government. On the flip side of that coin, when I look at the disincentives or prohibitions to build where people do own the land, where people do have the ability to put their own money into a project, it's unconscionable to me that during a housing crisis, we would tell someone they're not allowed to build an apartment in an area where you could be able to build an apartment because the infrastructure exists, because people want to live there. Back to the Housing Accelerator Fund, that was a big part of the rationale behind it. We wanted to say, do a little bit less of the stuff that makes it hard or impossible to build, and we'll put money on the table to incentivize you to do that. When we go forward looking at what incentives we're going to create to build, you should expect to see it's largely going to be density plays in environments that have those services. And not just big urban environments like the one you see behind me, but also in small towns that have the water pipes, that have the schools, that have the hospitals, the grocery stores, and the employers that are desperate to find people to move to those communities, like my own. As we move forward, you should expect to see more conditionality tied to the federal money that we put in place. To perhaps spoil a future announcement, if we fund transit, you will have to have the ability to have high density within walking distance to it. We're looking at establishing more conditionality on some of the transfers that happen today without the federal government insisting on much return on the investment, like the Canada Community Building Fund. So look, if you own your own property, you want to build, go ahead. But if you're looking for help from the government to make it easier to build, you should expect it's going to be close to post-secondary, close to transit, close to economic opportunities, and where communities already have the infrastructure, because we simply can't afford over a 50-year time horizon to continue to extend infrastructure where it doesn't exist. It's not good for the environment, it's not good for the economy, and it's very, very expensive.
It's very expensive, but it's also slower, right? Like there's multiple objectives that align here from a policy perspective. If you're going to do what you're saying right now, I believe you are, it would be a sea change. That would be a profound change. You may be aware that in this city, we've had a pretty robust debate about our subway system and where infrastructure goes, and ensuring that we have excellent transit access throughout all of our suburbs. And one of the tensions that we had, really, I would say, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, is that the same advocates who wanted higher order transit in the suburbs also didn't want density. And there was no linking of those two things. And even when I was chief planner, we tried to link those things together, and the councillors pushed back very, very hard. In a very short period of time, I was just speaking with Councillor Myers about this from Scarborough, in a very short period of time, that's actually flipped. And we now have in our suburban municipalities pro-housing, pro-growth councillors who are very open to density. I think beyond the GTA, when we start to get into smaller municipalities, it seems to me like it's going to be a harder sell. And in some ways, this leads to a question about what on the task force we've been referring to as an industrial strategy. We have Mike Moffat in the room, who's been a real advocate of the industrial strategy. The opportunity of an industrial strategy is that if we can figure out how to put significant incentives in place to factory build, to use panelization, we can begin delivering this change, particularly in proximity to transit, relatively quickly. Is an industrial strategy something that your government is seriously thinking about? And tell me a little bit about how you would define that. What kind of parameters would you put around that?
Sure. So maybe before addressing the industrial strategy, there was an important part to the preamble in your conversation about the conversations that are playing out at councils. And I find that historically everybody wants the services, but if you live in an area where you own your home and there's no density, you kind of want things to stay the same. I find that even in small communities, people are waking up to the collective responsibility to adopt rules that benefit for the community as a whole, rather than just my ability to live in it as an individual. People are starting to see, as we're coming out of fairly turbulent economic times on the heels of the pandemic, that if you don't address some of these scenarios, it's not just going to impact the protections around density at your house. It's going to price young people out of your city. It's going to prevent the people who are going to drive your economy for the next generation from actually making a decision to give their talents to your community. And I sense acutely that people are aware of that conversation. When you're dealing with a conversation about a small town like mine where a doctor wants to move but has nowhere to live, everybody says, let's build a home for the doctor. I'll go grab my hammer if I need to. You've seen this attitude change, not just in big cities. I'd argue in small towns around council tables as well. No two communities are the same. Second, you gave a shout out to Mike Moffat. The guy still picks up the phone when I call. Mike, I am grateful for your ongoing advice, so thank you. On the industrial strategy, we must adopt one. Specific to home building in this country. Now, there's a smattering of policies that we have, incentives here and there, that are designed to help increase housing output, but we need to pull it all together in a concerted way, because if we have a perfect policy framework that reduces taxes on home building, that eliminates all the unnecessary red tape, that invests in affordable housing, that deals with encampments, provides pathways for people to say, if we do all of it, but we don't have an industrial strategy, we will fail. We know that. We do not have the productive capacity in the Canadian workforce to build the number of homes that Jennifer alluded to in her opening. This demands that we look at a few different key pieces of the puzzle. The first is on training and skills development. We need to grow the capacity of the Canadian workforce to empower people in good-paying jobs, by the way, to actually build homes for their neighbors in a housing crisis. That's not a quick solution. It's a generational one if you're going to seriously scale up the number of people who work in home building. The second component is that we have to continue to use our immigration programs in a strategic way by bringing in people where we don't have the talent today and giving them a pathway to permanent residency through the express entry system or provincial nominee programs. But third, and in my opinion, most importantly, we need to build homes differently than we have for the past century. Now, there have been innovations in home building. I don't mean to suggest building today is identical to the way it was done 100 years ago, but we don't produce in factories the way that we could or should. When I talk to people who are actually involved in factory-built home operations, they're telling me, look, it makes sense, particularly on time. Cost will get there if we have volume. But there's too much risk today to make the announcement that we're looking, that you want us to make about opening the new factory. If we enter into a bust cycle the day after that we open our factory, we're going to be out hundreds of millions of dollars, not because the idea isn't good or the long-term plan of the business isn't viable, but we're going to lose our shirts if there's nobody to buy a home. What we need right now is consistency in demand, and this is where I think we can work with other levels of government on our part to potentially offer incentives to reduce the cost of purchasing that equipment, to scale up, to provide low-cost loans, but also to work with other levels of government who are in the business sometimes of ordering directly from these folks. Think about the things we could do at scale if orders of government were purchasing student residences in a coordinated way for post-secondary institutions that would have many of the same components, by the way, of the apartment buildings that we need to put up. Think about the opportunity if purchase orders were given to home building factories for long-term care facilities that would allow them to maintain a more even keel in an industry that's known for its boom and bust cycles. So we're looking at a range of different incentives right now, but a combination of training, immigration, and innovation through home building factories is going to be a big part of the path forward if we need to get where we want to be. And we can't ignore the fact that the skills development piece has to speak both to the traditional home construction, but also to what I hope will be a new era of home construction with more people learning how to operate the machinery in a factory setting.
So you mentioned that the skill development is really, that doesn't happen overnight. Getting the right trades at the table, really recalibrating the immigration system to ensure that we're capturing those who can enter into these trades, moving into our country. That's sort of not an overnight strategy. That's a building strategy. I'd like to just go a little bit deeper into this idea of the industrial strategy, because I think there's some components of it that when you start to really push become incredibly tricky. And I'll give a very specific example. We had in the City of Toronto a initiative, the Rapid Housing Initiative, using volumetric prefab structures to create really transitional housing. And on one of the sites in North York, the project kind of got NIMBY'd to death and got put on hold for, I think it's probably, someone in the room probably knows, maybe 900 days. Mark Richardson, of course you know. Thank you. 900 days. Well, the dirty little secret behind that 900 days is that the front part of that process went really well, which was that the volumes were made and they were purchased, but they couldn't be put on site because it got NIMBY'd. What happened to those volumes for those 900 days? Does anyone know? You know everything. Storage facility in Owen Sound where we paid, City of Toronto paid $70,000 a month to store the units, okay? That's one project on one site. The reason I want to highlight this is because that's one project on one site. There's a whole supply chain that links, it does link into the zoning of land, but it also has to do with the delivery. You can just imagine that if we had a factory that is pumping out these units, these volumes, and there's some type of hiccup in the supply chain, someone is losing their shirt big time. It's a very tricky thing to execute. And I'll just give one other example, because I'd like you to kind of, push a little bit with some of your thinking as to how this would actually work when there's so many elements to how we actually get housing built. The other is panelization. So in our company, Collective Marquee, we're building every type of home except for low rise, and I agree with your comments from a libertarian perspective. Go build whatever you want, but pay for it yourself. We'll only subsidize the things that have a greater benefit to society. But we have towers coming out of the ground right now. Our Cielo project on Bloor Street. We have projects where we're putting the shovel in the ground starting in a few months. And we have a series of missing middle projects that are really 5, 6, 7-story buildings that are being built through a panelized technology. They've been the most difficult projects to get off the ground. And part of it has to do with the supply chain and the implications on building factories to build the panels to the specifications that are required. There's an upfront capital cost. Now, we do know that historically in the shipping industry, for example, that the government actually played a role on the demand side in order to secure the pipeline. is there, like, when you're thinking about an industrial strategy, are you thinking about the government playing some of those more unconventional roles in either in order to allow industry to really invest at scale and start producing at scale, even though the rest of the pipeline isn't quite sorted out yet, as our rapid housing project in North York demonstrated?
So the answer is yes, though to distinguish it a little bit from the national shipbuilding strategy that you alluded to, we also are constrained a little bit by what the federal government buys. We actually buy the ships for our own use. Typically speaking, we can make financial contributions to projects, but we're rarely the proponent of a home building initiative. So we have to find different ways to incentivize other levels of government to make that happen. And I pointed to student residences, to long-term care facilities, and we have made some changes, by the way, to our low-cost financing for apartment buildings that's going to make it easier by putting federal savings on the table through low-cost loans for provincial governments in particular, but potentially developers as well, to essentially sign up to produce a batch of products. So we're having conversations with certain provinces about a student residence strategy, for example, that will flow through low-cost financing from the federal government to create that demand that will lead to more factory-built student residences to help out. But I think the other piece that we can't ignore is making sure that we don't just assume the rest of it's going to get worked out if we get that critical mass in home building factories. We actually have to help with that process from project ideation to getting your building permit to actual construction and delivery of factory-built homes. This is part of the reason why we wanted to embrace the catalog of pre-approved designs. In my view, it has a couple of key pieces. One is going to reduce barriers to entry for players who can skip the process of getting their own architect if there's a ready-made design, reduce the cost somewhat. It's also going to create economies of scale for the bigger players in the sector who will know that there's going to be the same thing they need to produce over and over and over. If you're producing the same panel, you can do it at a higher volume at a cheaper price per unit. But the linchpin in this whole thing is going to be to coordinate the design catalogs with the capacity of industry to build, with the approvals at a municipal level, with the permitting, and with the meeting the conditions in a provincial building code as well. So it's not a coincidence that we're trying to insist on certain density standards in the Housing Accelerator Fund, a 4-unit as of right, a higher level of density within walking distance to transit stations. We want to create designs that mirror the approvals that are being adopted in a widespread way as part of the industrial strategy. If we can align our programmatic supports with the pre-approvals at a municipal level, with the building codes at a provincial level, and with a catalog of pre-approved designs that we know can operate at scale by producing cost-efficient, labor-efficient, climate-friendly, and accessible places for people to live, we believe we can shave many months off the period of actually getting to a building a person can live in, which is in turn going to help drive the cost down for the people who are building those projects. So the answer to your question is yes, there's a lot we can do, but we can't just do some of it. We have to make sure we prevent that scenario where taxpayers are fronting 70 grand a month to put an unassembled building in a storage facility. It's crazy.
It's totally crazy, but I have to say, that was such an encouraging answer, because I think you did capture the entire pipeline kind of process from conception and site acquisition to occupancy. And I do think what you're really suggesting here is a profoundly expanded role for the federal government in ensuring that that entire pipeline is going to be viable. And look, the old model was CMHC had some programs and said, look, we've got some great rental construction financing for you. We've allocated a certain amount of money. If you can figure everything out, then you can tap into this money. But by the way, it's also going to take you a couple years to actually negotiate getting the money into your project. And that has been a big delay in many projects. But what you're talking about right now, including the emphasis on both scalability and replicating housing typologies and playing a role from manufacturing to project delivery, that's a pretty different role for the federal government to play. And very clearly it's needed because this is a national problem. This is something from coast to coast that needs to be solved and needs to be solved pretty quickly. I'm going to ask the minister one more question, but then I'm going to move to questions from the floor. So if you have a question, just throw up your hand and we'll make sure that we get a microphone to you. I'd like to shift gears. One of the things that I think there's been a lot of interest in is the use of public land. And there's been conversations about things like community land trusts and the possibility of even a federal community land trust. Using municipally owned lands is an idea that's been around, and provincially owned lands as well, is an idea that's been around for 20 years. We've been talking about it. It first appeared at a national level in the first version of the National Affordable Housing Strategy, where there was a line item. Are you guys Canadian Land Corporation folks? You must be. Because back then, Canada Lands was trying to figure out, like, what's our role here? What do we do here? How does this fit with our mandate around stewardship and our accountability to the Treasury Board for the lands that we have? And it turned out there was a fundamental conflict. This happened at the provincial level as well, that municipal organizations, they couldn't just go build affordable housing on their land because they had a responsibility and a mandate for highest and best use to the Treasury Board. So it seems like some of that may be starting to shift in a pretty substantive role. And what I'm wondering about is whether there's an appetite at the federal government for putting an incentive in place for municipalities and provinces, as well as our friends at the Canadian Lands Corporation, to partner with the private sector and the not-for-profit sector to build housing, a portion of which can be affordable if the land remains leased land. So not unlike a community land trust model where the land stays in public ownership in perpetuity. Imagine that we have a program, kind of the way you use the Housing Accelerator Fund to incentivize municipalities to upend their zoning. Imagine a low-cost construction financing program to incentivize municipalities, provinces, and Canada Lands to develop their sites in a land lease arrangement and, like you did with the GST, put a time period on it. You know, put a 5-year window on it so that everyone feels some heat to get out there, get the lands they have, to make the projects viable through the low-cost construction financing. Is there an appetite for that kind of an idea? It does a bunch of things. It keeps land in public trust because it's done through a land lease, which can be a very simplified way of doing it. We're testing this model. Collective Marquee is testing this model with the City of Toronto right now. We have a site that through a land lease with Create TO, and we're delivering 30% affordable housing. So we know it's a model that can work. Is there an appetite to scale it and to incentivize it?
So yes is the answer to your question, and I'll risk getting a little bit ahead of government policy. So this is Sean Fraser's thinking rather than what the government's implementing tomorrow, but if we can work towards this kind of a vision, I think it's going to be a potential game changer for a lot of projects. And there are things we do now through the Federal Lands Initiative and through Canada Lands Company that actually does create a higher level of affordability than most of our programs that we do, but it takes too long. I think everyone will acknowledge the pipeline of properties that we manage. When you're dealing with timelines that span into the number of years rather than the number of months, then you've got room to improve. So first on the municipalities and provinces, we have been seeing through the Housing Accelerator Fund, and not without exception, but the vast majority of communities who've received funding through that particular program have had some program to build more affordable housing on municipally owned land. It's one of the first things we ask for if it's not in the initial application and the letters that we send out to communities, and most frankly have already thought this is something that we can do to build more affordable housing. And a lot of public owned lands in different cities are in dense environments. Think parking lots next to transit stations, that kind of thing. So that there are huge opportunities. With provinces, I think there's a particular opportunity with the portfolio approach we're moving to under the Apartment Construction Loan Program. We're not just saying, here, take our money, flow it through to projects that you pick instead of projects we pick. We're saying, what incentives are you putting on the table? Whether it's direct cash injections into affordable housing projects managed by nonprofits, whether it's going to be the use of public land to make it possible to have not just affordable housing for low-income families, but so teachers and firefighters and nurses can live in places like Toronto and Vancouver. If we provide the low-cost interest and provinces or cities provide the land or cash contributions, we can build different kinds of homes so more people that we need to live in our cities can afford to live in our cities. The one other category that I think is important that we look at is federal lands that have not been declared surplus but are not incompatible with housing opportunities. Think about Canada Post as an example. Think about the Department of National Defence. If you can build 20 stories on top of a 2-story armory, you should look at doing that. If you have a Canada Post property in Metrotown in Burnaby that currently has a small space on a property that could hold a 60-story tower and another 30-story tower, we should build it because Canada Post still has the opportunity to use what we all know as a ground floor. There are enormous opportunities if we remove the cost of land, which has been one of the biggest costs and biggest increases in the cost of building in recent years. If we can help mitigate that cost increase and extract, importantly, commitments from the people who are going to build to actually offer a certain level of affordability, it's a no-brainer. So the devil will be in the details. There's thankfully some talented people who are here today that are helping us work through some of these challenges, but my sense is we need to unlock public lands that are not incompatible with housing, and it's frankly, in a housing crisis, hard to imagine a higher and better use.
I love it what you said about armories. For municipalities, the same goes for single-story libraries with parking lots. We have lots of school sites that can be redeveloped. There's lots of opportunities when you just expand the thinking a little bit. The one risk, of course, is that...
I think we got to go to questions. We have just 10
Sure,
minutes. So
sure.
If I can. So, do you mind? Some questions. All right, I'll give Mark.
Thanks for doing this. It's 979 days since the city asked for the modular housing minister's zoning order. My question this morning for the minister is right next door to us here. We have the Corktown station on the Ontario line. There's going to be 5 towers on that site as part of the provincial transit-oriented communities plan with 1,580 apartments. Right now, there is 0 affordable housing requirement from the province on pretty much any of these Ontario line sites. There's 13,000 units in their transit-oriented communities program. What can the federal government do to encourage our provincial partners to deliver a meaningful, mandatory, affordable housing component in these high-opportunity transit-oriented communities?
Short answer to a direct question. Choose to fund or not fund projects on the basis of whether affordable housing will be a part of the solution. There's conversations that we're having between officials at the federal and provincial level that impact some existing projects that I hope will come to a healthy resolution. But as we seek to book deals through the permanent public transit funding opportunity, money is going to start flowing a couple of years from now. But we have an opportunity to actually lock in through binding agreements with our partners conditions upon what kind of homes are going to be built. The question's often around what kind of density are we going to insist upon. But in addition to density, we can't just allow public lands or public funding to subsidize homes that people can't afford to live in. So you should expect to see when we go to book metro region agreements that we will be insisting on certain density changes and certain requirements around affordability in terms of a particular percentage of the units that will be offered at a price that families can afford. For existing projects where we've made the funding announcement, we have agreements. We do have discussions that we need to sort out. I'm encouraged because they are ongoing, but they haven't come to a resolution yet. But the short answer to your question is to fund or not fund projects on the basis of who's willing to build the most homes and most affordable homes. And keep in mind, from my perspective, whether it's transit funding or the Housing Accelerator Fund, there's no shortage of communities who want the density and affordable housing that would come with these terms. So I'm not hurting looking for partners to take our money. There are people with their hand up saying, tell me what you need, we will deliver. So in all things where there's a competitive process, the cream will rise to the top going forward. And my sense is we are not going to have a hard time extracting commitments on either density or affordability because we have so many dance partners that would like to have a chance at the cash.
One question way on the other side over there. Stand up, and then if we can get you a mic. Oh, you got a mic. I'll
Hi,
get
my
to you.
name's Jen. Oh, can
Really quick, we have room for maybe 2 more questions.
Okay. Hi, my name's Jenna. I'm a TMU urban planning student. First of all, I'd like to say thank you. I appreciate the initiatives for more affordable housing here, especially in the city of Toronto. Given both of your expertise and experiences, I wanted to ask more of a personal question, more so about the definition of affordable, how you both define the term affordable housing. Is this a universally accepted definition across all stakeholders, or is there still more work to understand this definition? And a follow-up to that would be, with making this affordable housing, how do we ensure it's kept affordable, given variables such as economic benefits, infrastructure, cost of infrastructure on the rise? How do we ensure that maintains to be affordable as well?
Look, maybe I'll go first and leave the expert to bring this question home. So first of all, awesome that you're studying planning, and thanks for coming out, Jen. I appreciate it. So first, there is not one generally accepted definition of affordable housing, and I think this is something that part of it's due to the loose way we talk about affordable housing, and part of it is that what's affordable in my hometown in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, is not affordable in downtown Toronto. So when I think about what we sometimes call deeply affordable housing, I usually think about what's geared to a person's income. If the benchmark tends to be about 30% of what you're earning can you actually have going towards your housing costs. There are other programs we have that primarily target supply of homes, which helps with affordability writ large across a city. And we usually insist, for example, when we have a low-cost loan, that you beat the market rate by a particular percentage, but that's more of a supply program than meant to help out the lowest income families. So both are good, by the way. Supply in and of itself is a wonderful, wonderful thing, and we should pursue that. But we need to have enough money in in our programs to build out that stock for people who are from low-income backgrounds. What success looks like to me is on the general supply. If an event in your life happens where you can't stay in your place, you should be able to find another apartment at the same price that you were paying before. That's when I know we will have solved some very big problems with the rental market. On the truly affordable housing for low-income families, when there's nobody who needs to live in a shelter beyond the first few weeks of an acute life experience that causes them to need it, that's when we will have succeeded. And that is a much longer-term goal because there are so many years that have gone by without a proper investment in affordable housing. Very quickly, how do we make sure it stays affordable? Pull it out of the market. If you're dealing with low-income families, I don't believe that there is a perfect market-based solution that's going to put a roof over everybody's head. We need to do more to allow nonprofits to actually pull organic affordable housing that exists in the market today into a nonprofit ownership model who are motivated not with making money, but putting roofs over people's heads.
With that, we are going to conclude our conversation with the minister. Please join me in thanking the minister for his time. I think that we're pretty lucky to be here at this moment in time with you as our minister, and we're just greatly appreciative of how deeply you're diving into all of these issues and your candor in speaking with all of us. It's really invaluable. I think every single person in this room could not be more passionate about getting housing built and ensuring that every Canadian has access to a home. So you're among friends. We're on your team, and you can probably call on any person in this room to help you out in getting the job done. So thanks again for all of your time.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's a pleasure.